Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. I learned a new word in Spanish, Fia-tios. Actually, it's a word I just made up. Actually, it's not even that. It's a word Stacy made up. Fia-tios. Stacy?
Well, this is a good time to introduce me, Stacy Herbert, because I invented this new word, Fia-tios, adios, fiat. And, well, just seeing this tweet here would make you think it's time, it's bye-bye for fiat. This is from Mario Draghi. The tweet is from the ECB, and they're quoting Mario Draghi, who is the outgoing head of the ECB. Negative rates will not provoke the collapse of the financial system. This is what Mario Draghi claimed. As soon as you get official denial, of course, that is when to believe we are about to witness the collapse of the financial system.
All right, so Fia-tios, exit from fiat. It's happening as big countries accumulate big positions in gold. That's an exit from fiat, because we know that over the past 300 years, no fiat money has survived. They've all gone to zero. The average lifespan being 27 years, with the exception maybe of the British pound, but it's lost 99.5% of its purchasing power. So to stay in fiat is an admission of, yeah, I'm Venezuela. I want to lose all of my money. Or, yeah, I'm the Weimar Republic. It's all going to go to zero. People are exiting fiat. They're fiat adiosing.
They're fiat adiosing. And of course, we are here in Latvia, Riga, Latvia, at a Bitcoin conference, and this is the sovereign individual saying adios to fiat. They're exiting because they see that these negative rates are destroying capital, and we see that the negative rates are destroying economies. In fact, when the ECB cut rates further this past week, actually, the Netherlands, France, and Germany, their central bankers were urging the ECB not to do this because it was destroying capital. Of course, our president in the United States, Donald Trump, was encouraging the Fed to catch up to the ECB and other central banks to go negative. Now, you don't have to know that much about history to know that this same exact thing happened pre-World War II. It happened after the financial collapse of 1929. We saw a beggar thy neighbor policy, and this is active, all out. It's starting to become all out. It's been slow, it's been kind of quiet and polite since 2008, but now it's getting aggressive.
Right, so, you know, as I said, fiat money has a perfect track record of always failing. It's never survived. And so why should we believe them this time when they start telling us that they have a scheme, a cunning plan to make their fiat money stop going to zero?
So here's an article from Bloomberg, Bloomberg.com, and of course Bloomberg is associated with the financial system and Wall Street and writing headlines about Wall Street. So here is their headline about Fia-tios, essentially, because again, they look from 2008, the financial crisis, 10 years ago, and they notice in the past 10 years, Russia's huge gold stash is now worth more than $100 billion. The value of Russia's gold reserves climbed 42% in the past year. Russia is diversifying from U.S. assets, and gold has rallied. So they're saying that Russia's long-term bet, their long-running bet on gold, is actually starting to pay off as gold prices start to rally. And they note that the country quadrupled gold reserves in the past decade as it diversified away from U.S. assets, a move that has paid off recently as haven demand sent prices to a 6-year high. In the past year, the value of the nation's gold jumped 42% to $109.5 billion, and the metal now makes up the biggest share of Russia's total reserves since 2000.
Right, well, Putin recently said that the world is not abandoning the dollar is abandoning the world. And, you know, that's a very succinct way of explaining what's happening around the world in terms of countries, whether it's Turkey, China, Russia, Poland, buying hundreds of tons of gold, and the dollar, or I should say gold, making new highs against every major currency in the world, all-time highs, except for the dollar, and that'll come soon.
Well, in fact, Citigroup believes it's going to hit a new all-time high in U.S. dollar terms. Based on this tweet from Marco Byrne of Goldcore, Citigroup says gold may top record at $2,000 per ounce. Citi is bullish on gold due to the prospect of the Fed cutting interest rates to zero. heightened geopolitical tensions and rising risks of a global recession. So here you have Donald Trump, and we're heading into a new U.S. election. U.S., the Federal Reserve doesn't like to be seen to be involved in the political process. So, how they're going to behave in the next year is unknown at this point. But certainly Trump is berating them and demanding negative interest rates even, which I don't know if he understands it, but I'm not sure that it could survive negative rates. As Mario Draghi said, the financial system could survive negative rates. But I think he's maybe only talking about the euro, whether it could survive negative rates in the US dollar as well.
Right. Well, if you have the world reserve currency, the U.S. dollar, and you're reaping a benefit from having that reserve currency for decades. After World War II, Bretton Woods, world reserve currency, the U.S. dollar. If you begin to de-globalize and de-dollarize, the rest of the world has one very simple recourse: buy tons of gold, hundreds of tons of gold, and to prepare for when you finally pull the pin on the grenade and blow the U.S. dollar to smithereens, and you're sitting there with very little gold as reserves to your debt, versus a country like Russia, which now has a huge percentage of gold per GDP, per their capitalization of that country, and other countries as well. So the rest of the world is like watching America, a 2-year-old, play with a razor blade. That razor blade is self-inflicted harm due to ignoring the U.S. dollar and by going down that rabbit hole of negative interest rates. The rest of the world is saying, do it. Do it. Pull the pin, because we're ready. We got the gold. Pull the pin, Donald. Pull the pin, Donald. And Donald's like, la, 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 la.
Well, he himself cannot cut interest rates. He can only berate the Fed chairman, Jay Powell. Whether or not Jay Powell ever abides by this, we do not know, because there are people who will say the dollar will instantly die. So I think you see nations like Russia, you see nations like China, these major trading partners, especially China to the U.S., prepare for the eventual exit. In America, there's another headline from the past week that I also think is a sign of de-dollarization from those who actually have no access to capital, who have no savings, who have no wealth. But a way to de-dollarize is also to blow up the system in terms of just spending so much more money than you possibly have. Because this was an amazing story. Breaking U.S. consumer credit rose by $23.3 billion in July, beating all estimates, mostly driven by credit card debt. So, I think in a way, this is also individuals who don't own Bitcoin, who don't own gold, nation states who own gold. Like, these individuals are people who sense that this, like the free ride, the easy money is over, and times are about to get hard, and it's hard being hard, it's hard living within your means, it's hard having hard money and living under hard money. It has a better, stronger economy ultimately, but to live within your means, here these guys are just like, it's a sign that they understand what's coming.
Well, if you look at the board of directors for companies that manufacture OxyContin and other opiate products, and you look at the board of directors of credit card companies like Visa and MasterCard, you'll see a lot of overlap between these two board of directors, because both products, whether it's credit or heroin, synthetic heroin, are marketed in the same way. You take it to feel good and to ease the pain. And they both lead to the same outcome. Strung out in the street with nothing, with a needle in your arm, cursing the day you were born. And that's unfortunately going to replace the American flag as the image of America in the 21st century.
In a fiat world, the numbers, your GDP, everything can be fake. So you don't know until the tide goes out whether or not, those unemployment numbers would suggest, hey, this consumer credit card number, remember, credit card rates right now are at an all-time high. Interest rates are at 0% or even negative, as we pointed out, negative interest rates in Europe. And yet, credit card interest rates, that which you charge the consumer, is at an all-time high in the United States. And despite this, consumers have increased their volume of debt on there. So either they're really confident that their jobs and their futures and their incomes are continuing to climb and that they could pay this off, or they're very desperate. They're in a desperate situation and they'll even resort to this usurious rates to survive another day. We don't know until it all blows up, if it does.
Right, and it's another example of financial vandalism, as it's being called, right? Because interest rates all move in concert, whether it's the discount rate or credit card rates, they should all move up and down in concert, and credit card rates should not be left up there at mid-teens with the interest rate, interbank rate at 0 or negative. That's vandalism by the bankers.
So, and I want to turn to this final headline here from Brian McDonald, and it's a tweet, and it reads, meanwhile, RU_RBC reports that Russia's reserves are now larger than its credit obligations. This means Russia is one of only 2 European countries that essentially has no public debt. The other is Norway. So, of course, these are 2 oil majors, Norway and Russia, and they're, despite what the BBC had said 2 years ago or 3 years ago when they predicted a balance of payments crisis, which means that your external debts are larger than the size of your reserves, that you can't cover them. So here they're saying that there's no danger of any sort of crisis because they have more cash than they have debt.
It's amazing because, of course, Norway has a sovereign wealth fund. That's quite huge, but it's mostly in stocks and fiat-based assets. And Russia has the equivalent of a sovereign wealth fund, but it's all in gold bullion, 24-karat gold bullion. So this will be an interesting to see who's holding the better hand.
So who's holding the better hand? In fact, Russia has 40% of their reserves are in the euro. They're also accumulating yuan, Chinese renminbi. So they're actually, apparently, according to some online stories, that they're going to be issuing a yuan bond as well, rather than most people do a dollar bond. So we're seeing the de-dollarization. This is all just normal. It has happened throughout history. One empire rises, the other falls. This is the rise of China in terms of, if you look, they are the #1 trade partner with most nations, so it just makes sense that you would expand your renminbi reserves, whether or not China ultimately wants that or whether they want a gold-backed currency, a gold-backed trade settlement currency as a unit of account or a Bancor-like currency. We'll see in the future.
I remember when Medvedev was holding up that gold coin, this was maybe 2008 or so. It was like, he's telling the world this is where we're headed, and that's exactly where they went. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Francis Pouliot. He's the CEO of BullBitcoin, Canada's Bitcoin company. Francis, welcome.
Thanks, Max. It's a pleasure.
Awesome to have you. I've been following you for years. You've been following us for years. And it's all part of this incredible Bitcoin space. You're a big part of it, certainly in Canada. And I wanted to just jump right in and ask you, since you've been involved in Bitcoin since 2013, what do you think over the past 6 years some of the highlights have been?
I think some of the highlights of Bitcoin has been how the community and the industry has responded to the challenges of this emerging technology. I think a good example of that is the first big Bitcoin hack, the Mt. Gox hack that happened in 2014.
Mt. Gox hack of 2014. Who could forget?
Right. Such an incredible amount of Bitcoins has been lost. And how did the community respond? In a couple of ways. The first one was this awareness that people should have the custody of their own Bitcoin keys. So hold your own keys has become, since then, and increasingly in the last few years, a big mantra of Bitcoin. If you don't own the keys, you don't own the coins, which is a common saying. This is not something, for example, that was popular or a part of the narrative before. And as a result of this hack, there's been a ton of solutions developed, from multi-signature to hardware wallets. Another good example of how the community was anti-fragile following a crisis or something volatile was this whole episode of the SegWit2x fork, the Bitcoin Unlimited fork, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV. As a result of all these tensions and drama and conflict, Bitcoiners started to run their own full nodes, and that became another big tenet of the Bitcoin ethos. So now it's hold your own keys and run your own node. And tons of products and services have been developed in response to this new market need, which was created through this Bitcoin narrative. The Casa, the HODL, all those physical nodes, the BTC Pay Server project, which removes the reliance on third-party nodes, my own project CipherNode, Pierre Rochard's Node Launcher. So I think what's incredible to see is that Bitcoin is kind of a living and evolving organism, right? And as soon as something bad happens to it, there's an immediate reaction, and as a result, the network is stronger and more resilient than it was in the first place.
Right, it's a living organism. Some have postulated that the parallels to living organisms actually extend into whole ecosystems of organisms in nature that we find. And the statement that someone made, it could have been me, is that you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you.
Totally, absolutely.
What do you think of that?
I totally agree. I mean, I can't even remember what I was before Bitcoin. I mean, it's kind of like a new beginning. I have.
Is that the game theory?
Yes.
Working on your mind and my mind and the collective mind?
Yeah.
And so explain how that works or a little bit, what it means to you.
I mean, one of the greatest changes that I see in people is their time preference, right? So their time horizon. They become much more concerned about the future. They start thinking about their children. They start thinking about long-term solutions. They start thinking about longer legacies, what the world's going to be like after them. Because this idea that you can store wealth for a very, very large amount of time with Bitcoin makes you start to think about the future.
Throughout history, governments have always tried to pawn off the population, printing money, bread and circuses, part of the Roman Empire.
Right.
And never, ever in history has there been an unconfiscatable digital scarcity, hard money, commodity money available to the individual. And in the beginning, there was a time in the notes of Satoshi Nakamoto where there was a fear that we should be quiet about this. Let the hash rate get up a bit because we want to keep this under the radar. The hash rate's now approaching 100 quintillion hashes, calculations per second. Is it now beyond the reach of any government or group of governments to engage in an attack on Bitcoin?
I think it's definitely much harder than it was a few years ago, but the last thing we should do is sit on our laurels and think we've already won the battle. I mean, you look at the Bank of International Settlement, you look at the International Monetary Fund, all the central banks, all the government agencies, and all the big banks like JP Morgan that are responsible for the fiat Ponzi and the centralized. I mean, they're not at home thinking, oh, gosh darn it, we lost to Bitcoin. What are you going to do? We're going to get disrupted. No, they're going to fight back, right?
But that's built into the protocol.
Yeah.
That's part of the game theory. So it's just going to infect another group of people, Jamie Dimon or the BIS. I mean, they're now getting the fever.
Yeah.
They will try to attack it, but that just makes the hash rate go higher.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty about Bitcoin is like the more you attack it, the more the white blood cells, which is, the Bitcoin entrepreneurs, the Bitcoin builders, the Bitcoin, the people who are working in this industry, like they get to work, right? You see Bitcoin getting attacked and they immediately move into action and they're finding new creative entrepreneurial solutions to these kinds of problems. And I think over time, I'm pretty happy with the way that this has evolved because Bitcoin has been attacked. It has been the victim of social attack. It has been the victim of hash rate attacks. You've had hostile miners that have tried to attack it. And, since, for example, Bitmain tried to split the network, we've built in this resilience against, hash rate attacks, right, by running our own full nodes. So I think we should absolutely not think that we're in the clear, but it's an undeniable fact that attacking Bitcoin is becoming very, very difficult, and the number of entities that are able to successfully pull off an attack is decreasing over time. But I think in the coming years, Bitcoin is a threat right now, but it's going to be a big threat when hyper-Bitcoinization happens, when there's this speculative attack where people are exiting fiat currencies into Bitcoin, and governments see that they're actually starting to lose control over their public policy because they can't control the monetary flow anymore and they can't finance their projects. They're going to really start to dig into Bitcoin, and hopefully what's going to happen is, Bitcoin Knights are going to rise to the challenge. These may be corporations.
The Bitcoin Knights.
The Bitcoin Knights
of the round table.
Absolutely. So
riding into the storm.
Right. I mean, never underestimate what drives a Bitcoiner. I mean, of course, there's a lot of people that are in it for the money, right? A lot of people start investing in Bitcoin just because they want to have more money in the future. But a lot of people are willing to, sacrifice everything for Bitcoin. I mean, it's a cause. I think about that, I get the goosebumps. The idea of participating in this actual revolution, which is really impacting the world. I mean, it's phenomenal. And Bitcoiners have skin in the game, right? They're very, very involved and committed to this cause. Whereas, a banker, I don't think any banker is going to die to preserve the banking system. I mean, who's going to sacrifice himself as an individual for the cause of fiat? No one. I mean, this doesn't create any sense of belonging, any sense of community, any sense of romanticism to work for the fiat sector. So I would.
Well, that's the reason I don't support the Toronto Maple Leafs. They simply never ever win a Stanley Cup. I think it's been 50 years now.
Yeah.
No, that's a bit of a digression there. But the point is well taken. Nobody would go to war to fight for fiat money. Because it has a horrible track record. It's lost every single fiat money ever created. It's gone to zero.
And Bitcoin has a soul. The fiat system has no soul.
Right. And in Canada, what is the mood there in terms of the government, in terms of the overall feeling?
Yeah, so Canada is quite a unique place. First of all, there's a lot of Bitcoiners in Canada. I mean, according to the last 5 surveys that I've seen, and these are government surveys like by the Central Bank and the Ontario Securities Commission, about 4 to 5% of Bitcoiners own Bitcoin. So we have a very large amount of Bitcoin holders in the country, and that is reflected by the fact that we have some pretty good regulations. I mean, the government's been working on KYC AML regulations for 5 years, and they've just been passed and made official. This is what we're going to get. We don't expect anything else for the future. And there's no new Bitcoin law. There's no bit license. Bitcoin was just included in the existing framework like if it was any other kind of currency, which is fantastic. The government in Canada used to tax the sale of Bitcoin. We had this double taxation problem. That's been reversed, so there's no sales tax on the sale of Bitcoin for fiat. Generally speaking, it's a pretty good jurisdiction. I mean, you got a lot of resources in Canada that are in the energy sector, right? So you got the oil and gas sector that's interested in Bitcoin because they can use Bitcoin mining to offload their electricity surplus and their energy surplus. Same thing for hydro. So, unless something dramatically shifts with Canada, I think it's going to be a very good place to be a Bitcoiner in the future.
Right. So, you mentioned some of the properties of Bitcoin, censorship resistance being one of the primary, you may even consider it to be the most important feature. Would you agree with that, and could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think censorship resistance is at the core of what Bitcoin aims to achieve, because previous attempts at digital currency, if we remember correctly, like the Liberty Reserve or all those gold-backed digital currencies that started to pop up, late 90s, early 2000s, all of them failed because they were relying on a central third party, which could be censored. Censorship resistance is definitely the key feature, the key killer app of Bitcoin. Some of the examples that we have for this in the Bitcoin space, which tell us that this is real, is WikiLeaks. When WikiLeaks got shut down by PayPal, PayPal is not censorship resistant, right? So they were, in fact, censored. Anybody that can be censored, I mean, the way things are going, everybody's going to get censored one day, right? If you're slightly divergent from the status quo and the politically approved message from the banking overlords and the government overlords and the culture overlords, I mean, you're eventually going to get censored. So WikiLeaks went against the system, was censored, was able to bypass the censorship with Bitcoin. When I look at why I got into Bitcoin in the first place, I mean, that WikiLeaks event is definitely one of the big ones. Without censorship resistance, you don't have free speech, you don't have free money. You can't have free speech without having free money, because sure, nobody's going to put a piece of tape on your mouth and prevent you from speaking if you're censored from the payment system, but you're not going to have any platform to talk about your ideas, and you get obviously a very, very unfair advantage. The others have an unfair advantage over you, right? So if you want to control speech, the first thing you're going to do is cut off the livelihood of the people whose speech you don't like. The other big, components to Bitcoin, I mean, it's that trustless validation. So in Bitcoin, everything is auditable, everything is trustless. When you receive a payment, you don't need anybody to tell you that you received the payment, and you can validate the whole history yourself. You don't need to rely on third parties to have chargebacks. And obviously, the other killer feature of Bitcoin, other than censorship resistance, is this digital scarcity, decentralized digital scarcity. So the fact that Bitcoin is limited and its production schedule is scarce, the fact that it is difficult to produce Bitcoin, all of these combined create just a recipe for disruption. So Bitcoin allows people to save their wealth without getting devalued by the government. Bitcoin allows people to transfer their wealth, and a Bitcoin transaction in the end is just a message. It's a message you're sending to everyone else. So it's impossible for me to separate, freedom of transaction and free money from free speech, which is obviously a big challenge today, and it's as we've seen, free speech is under attack. So free money is the weapon to resist this attack.
All right, Francis, got to cut it off there. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max. It was a pleasure.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Francis Pouliot of BullBitcoin. It's Canada's Bitcoin company. Hey, if you want to catch us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report or KeiserReport.com. Till next time, bye, y'all.